All right, we are back. This is Creativity is the Cure. I'm your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have a very special guest, the one and only Peter Hendee Brown. How are you doing today, Peter?
I'm terrific, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm great. I'm in Palmdale, California. Where are you talking to me from?
That sounds nice. I'm in a Zoom room at the place where I office in the city of Minneapolis, about a half mile from the Mississippi River.
How's the weather out there?
Getting better after a weird winter. So yes, 55. I think it's going to be nice this weekend. So I'm excited about that. And we've had a lot of sun in the past week, so that's good for my disposition.
Yeah, we recently moved from LA to out to the desert, about an hour away, and I'm enjoying the diversity of weather out here. It's a little bit colder, a little bit warmer.
Colder at night.
Colder at night, yeah, perfect. Nice and cool to sleep and then enjoy the warm day. Yeah. So let's tell everybody how we know each other. We were just discussing the fact that you grew up with my brother, Jim. You guys went to high school and college together. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Malcolm's brother, Jim, and I both ended up at a little private school called the Harley School because neither one of us was excelling, let's say it that way, at public schools. And and we were both new there. I think he was there a year before me. I was there in maybe 9th grade or 10th grade. I came in 11th grade. And we became friends because it was one of these sandbox club kind of places where most of the people have been there since kindergarten. And the folks that come in the last couple of years have to kind of band together. And we did that, and we hung out, did a lot of things together, had some other friends. But one of the things that Jim and I did together was kind of in the spring between our junior year. Jim let me know that there was a summer program for high school kids who think they want to be architects when they grow up at Cornell University, which is like 2 hours away from where we lived in Rochester. And I didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up. And the word architect hadn't come across my radar screen, but I'd been drawing and painting and building models of everything for years and years and years. And so Jim and I both went, and I was like, this is my jam. I'm going to be an architect. I love this. I can't believe I didn't know you could have a career where you get paid to draw and build models and stuff like that. So, I was like, I found it, and I loved it. And I went and I applied and I got in. I went there as an undergrad. Jim went as well. So we were there all through college, and we're still good friends. We have a little group of buddies that we've all known each other since way back then. And we see each other every couple of years and sometimes around our birthdays. The ones that end in 5 and 0 at this point, but now we're trying to do it more often because you don't know.
Wow, that is really cool. Now, before we get deeply into this, I'm going to let everybody know who do not know you that you're an architect, a planner, a development consultant, and an educator. Do all those sound correct?
That's about right.
And really, before we get into this, I've got to say, I often call myself the mayor of Simpleton because my love of architecture is very limited. When I think of architecture, some of my favorite people are Frank Lloyd Wright, Antoni Gaudí, and the Bauhaus and the arts and crafts movement. But that is about it. And like I was telling you before, I always knew that you're an architect, but I just figured you made houses and buildings. And when I started reading your books, I had no idea what a wide scope everything was. So let's start out with a few of your things that you have out there. You have 2 books. I am currently reading and listening to How Real Estate Developers Think, Design, Profits, and Community. And because I'm always stuck in traffic, I also got the Audible. I have not read your America's Waterfront Revival yet, but I look forward to that. Also, I'm loving your podcast for a lot of reasons. Your podcast is called The Reflective Urbanist. One thing that caught me off guard is I listen to a lot of podcasts, and most of your episodes are about 7 minutes. And I was like, oh, that's not enough. But I'm finding them very dense with information and fun. And I love the way that you set it up. Each episode contains a story, a theory, and a lesson. Plus, in my opinion, lots of humor. And it bridges ideas and practices to illuminate how things get done in a city. And I love how you have a lot of history, too. So how did your podcast idea come about?
It's kind of one of these, how far back do I go? But I'll say that I've been a short attention span kid for a long time, and I went I went from architecture after about 11 or 12 years of practicing. I lived in Philadelphia for a long time, and then I quit and I went into city government in Philadelphia, and then I went back to grad school for planning and government administration, and then we moved out to Minneapolis, and I worked in real estate development for a while, and then I started my own consulting practice. So I tell my students I've tried out a lot of the different chairs around the table that is kind of city development stuff. And after going back to grad school and finally being a good student for the first time in my life when I was in my late 30s and early 40s, I never pursued an academic career, but I loved a lot of the theoretical things I learned. And one of the things that's interesting, and I teach in a graduate school right now, a planning program here in Minneapolis, and it's not uncommon to hear the students say that, there's kind of a lot of theory and it's really not that helpful in real life. And sometimes there's something to that. They want to teach me how to do my job the first day I get a job. Couldn't possibly do that the right way. Anyhow, you have to get a job, and that's where you really learn how to do the jobs. I liked a lot of the things I studied and read when I was in grad school. I wrote a dissertation about large-scale urban redevelopment and waterfront redevelopment, and I just read a lot of stuff. I like reading, and I can consume a lot, and all these things sort of stuck with me. And I found that as I kind of got back into the workforce and for the last 20 years since then, all these ideas keep popping into my mind when I'm having a real street level, real life experience. And so I like this idea of theory being able to inform practice. And it's easy to talk about. And a lot of people talk, I want to, help practitioners by, getting theories that help them understand. But it's not that easy to do it. And you actually kind of have to understand both well enough to do it. And so I try to walk this tightrope where I'm full-time practitioner and a part-time academic, and try and pick these ideas that might help you understand why funny things are happening in that planning commission meeting. So
right.
A few years ago, I go to conferences for both architects and planners, and I was at a planning conference and I was on a panel discussion with 3 other people, and I think it was like a fast, funny, and passionate thing where we each did like a 10-minute talk about something that we liked, and mine was called the Technician and the Philosopher. And it was kind of about how if you're going to be a planner, you've got to be able to think big ideas like the good life, and then you've got to be able to get down to the street level and turn a wrench and fix something. And so
right.
I like this idea, and I made this little slideshow with like a dozen slides in it. And I ended up showing it to students over the next couple of years and kind of tweaking it here and there. And then I had an idea, and I thought, what if I got some other people I know who have PhDs who've actually worked in real life, and we had a panel discussion at one of these conferences talking about theory and practice. So I lined up 4 other people I knew who had PhDs in planning and government administration, and I put in this proposal, and then COVID started, and we got an email back from the conference organizers saying, well, it's going to be shorter, it's going to be on Zoom, and we're going to eliminate a lot of the stuff that isn't basic. And I thought, well, this idea is too kooky. They're not totally going to not accept it. But
right.
But they accepted it. Yeah, they did accept it. It was called 5 Eggheads Talk Big Ideas.
I want a T-shirt. I want to get a T-shirt that says that.
I know. And you're trying to be accessible. You're not trying to scare people away with 5 PhDs. 5 Eggheads Talk Big Ideas, practical uses of philosophy in your planning career. And there's a guy who actually does, colored cartoons about philosophy. You kind of need to know a little bit, but they're under. So I was using these on the cover slide, and so we had this thing, and then they called and they said, your program got picked, and you're going to do it, and you've got 45 minutes. And there were 5 of us, and I was like, oh my God, how are we going to? So we got together, and I said, okay, here's the deal. Everybody goes once, and you get to say who you are, what your academic background is, what your professional experience has been, one
right.
big idea that you got out of grad school that you really loved that made sense to you, and how it makes sense at the street level for people that work in planning. And
right.
So we all did this. It was filled with humor, and it was interesting. It was like, we got together and talked about it on Zoom, and so we all knew each other well enough. We didn't over rehearse it, but it was fun and genuine, and it got super, it got nice ratings from all the people that listened, and we liked it. We thought, oh, damn. And so next year we did another one. It was like the return of the Eggheads, and then I'm not making this up. And then the year after that, COVID ended, so we had the Eggheads live.
Wow.
Because we could have a real live, and some of us had never met in real life. This is COVID, right? And
right.
So we all did it, and then we all went out and had some margaritas and decided, okay, let's go out on top and stop it right now while it's good. So that idea was rattling around in my head, and then I was thinking about writing another book about public spaces and public realm projects, and I'd been teaching a course in it, and I worked on a bunch of projects that were really cool public realm projects, and I thought I had something to contribute. And then COVID started and George Floyd was murdered not very far from here, and other things happened, and the way people talk about public space changed completely, and all the wind went out of my sails, and I lost interest. I thought this idea is not the right idea now, and what do I do? But I like to have a big project going, so that's in terms of creativity. We can talk more about that. But and I took a short story. This is a long story, but I'm going somewhere. I took a short essay writing class at a place here, and it was completely asynchronous. And once a week, you had to write 1,000 words or less essay yet. And I blasted out a bunch of those, and they were super fun. And I've never had writer's block, and I love writing. And I was sitting there trying to put two and two together, and I was like, what if I just, instead of writing a book, what if I just wrote a bunch of short, accessible, essays that were based on this egghead idea, right? Where I say, okay, I'm trying to connect theory and practice, right? And I started drafting up a bunch of these things, and I started talking to people about it. What do you think about it? And then I came up with this idea, this formula of a story and a theory and a lesson, where, each one of these things begins with a paragraph that's kind of a story that doesn't quite make sense. And then it's followed by a paragraph that's a very simple, clear summary of a theory that some egghead spent 400 pages on, and you're never going to read his book, right? Crushed down into a really understandable basic idea, you know. And then the next paragraph is, so what really happened in that funny story makes a little more sense now if you look through the lens of this theory I just gave you. And then, the last paragraph is, so the lesson is, don't run with scissors or whatever. So, it took some time getting it together. And then I asked a lot of people, and I talked to some of my students, and I was going to do it, as a blog, and now people call those newsletters or whatever. There's different terms for all this stuff.
Right.
And I talked to some of my current and recently former students, and they were like, yeah, that's a great idea, but could you record yourself reading it, So they weren't saying out loud because we don't really read much, but I thought, well, I guess if I want to attract that part of the audience, I'm going to have to learn how to do that. So I figured out how to start trying to record myself, and I set up a weird little studio in my office, and now it's a two-sided thing. You can either read an essay that's 1,000 words, or you can listen to a 7-minute podcast. And that's my weird little template that, people have. I appreciate what you said. Thank you very much. I've had people say they're not long. They're not an hour and a half, and they're not interviews.
Right.
And what I'm going to do, I think, for the next 2 or 3 months, my shakedown cruise here is going to be the things you've seen, like, 5 to 10 minutes in length if you listen to them, and about 1,000 words, and just really get that tight and nail it. And by the way, I'll say your brother has done some editing for me on a few of them. He's been very helpful. Yeah,
And I've got to say that I was a little bit intimidated about, reading and listening about architecture, because I didn't think I would know enough. And I had looked through your book a little bit. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to understand this. I love the simplicity and the approachability. So I could tell anybody, if you love architecture or you want to know how cities are put together, this is the way to start out. There's just so many cool things. I can tell you're very well read. I like how you bring an excerpt from a well-known book and put it in there. There's a lot of history. There's just so many different areas that you are bringing together. And I love, I just listened to the dangers of name dropping episode, which was really funny. I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but it's not what you think. And it's some really good advice. And, it never seems condescending. It just seems like you're talking to everybody at eye level in a way that everybody can understand. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I have this idea, and people have studied and written and talked about this, but there's a famous guy at Harvard named Steven Pinker, and he wrote a book on writing style. He's a neuroscientist, a neurobiologist, or something like that. He's a very smart guy. And he wrote this book, like a style guide, a replacement for Strunk and White, because nobody's done one for 100 years, and how to write clearly. And he did it because he said, my fellow academic colleagues write in this way that's impenetrable and difficult. And he came and spoke. My wife and I went and saw him speak at the library here in Minneapolis, and he was hilarious. And he put up a sentence on a slide, and he said, "Can you understand what that says?" And we're like, "No." He said, "Well, this was in an article in my discipline, and I don't know what it means." So his thing was that, like, academics write to obfuscate because they're a little insecure and they don't necessarily want people, they don't want to have to, own it if they have to. And my rule has always been, if my parents can't read it, I'm not doing my job. They are not academics, and there's smart people, but I want my parents to be able to read it, and everybody else I know, it should be accessible. And if you want anybody to buy it, read it, and talk about it, you need it to be for everyone, not just a few people. So that's where I start.
I like the delivery of how you read things too, because like I said, when I first grabbed your book, How Real Estate Developers Think, I was a little bit intimidated, but when I started listening to your podcast and listening to the Audible version, there's just something about the way that you speak that is very approachable. So I suggest people do that. Tell me a little bit about that first book, though. Did that come before the podcast?
The development book?
Right.
That's my second one. That's the
oh, okay.
Yeah. The first one was my dissertation, and I rewrote it as a book, and that came out in 2009. That's America's Waterfront Revival.
Right.
And that's a little denser. You should be able to read it if you want to. I finished that book, and I was trying to decide what to do next, and I had moved out here, and I was working in real estate development during the housing boom during the noughties, and I had worked with developers as an architect, and then when I was in city government, I worked with developers, and then when I was writing my dissertation, I was interviewing developers in San Francisco and San Diego and Tampa and other places, and then I came out here and I was like, why don't I just try it? I'll do development, see how that goes. One of the courses I teach, and I've been teaching since 2008, is called Private Sector Development. So I teach planners how to understand what developers are trying to do. And so I was taking a walk with my wife, and I just shipped the box with the manuscript for the book about waterfronts, and we were walking through the woods, and I was like, I've got an idea. I think I could write a book about how real estate developers think that's for everyone else. Right. Developers don't need my help. They know how to think their way in there. And so I thought, what if I just, because people are scared of developers, or they don't understand the math is complicated. It's like a black art, it's right. We can't trust those guys. They're going to come and wreck my neighborhood with some project, right? That's the view of developers, right? And so, but it's not that complicated. They do what they do, and they do it for a reason, and you can understand it. So that was my, I thought, what if I try and explain developers to everyone else?
Yeah.
And I went and tried to do that, and it's done well as a book. I mean, and it's published by a university press, so guys, technically it's an academic book, but it's written for everybody, and you can understand it. And I think I've sold about 8,000 copies, which apparently for academia, that's like a bestseller. That's like I tell people, I'm Peter Brown. I'm not Dan Brown. This is not the Da Vinci Code.
Your book is a lot better.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And so, anyhow, yeah. And some of the funnier things, like I interviewed, like I probably interviewed, plus I had developers come to my class. I probably talked to a couple hundred developers in the last 15 years. And when the book came out, I talked to one guy, and he's like, yeah, what is that, Peter? Is that a work of science fiction? How real estate developers think? Do they think? Is it a bunch of blank pages? I mean, I had more developers coming up with funny.
It's like a roasting.
Funny questions. Yeah. They all thought it was funny. Like, what makes you think we think? That kind of thing. So, yeah.
I like what it says on the back cover, that the book portrays developers as creative visionaries who are able to imagine future possibilities for our cities and communities, and shows that understanding them will lead to better outcomes for neighbors, communities, and cities. It's interesting, when we moved out of LA, we were in this suburban neighborhood, but slowly all the houses were being placed by apartments and complexes. Mm-hmm. And of course, the people that own the land want to make more money, blah, blah, blah. But, I looked at the issue in simple terms, like, all these people care about money and they're not thinking about anything. But when I started listening to your podcast and reading your book, I had no idea what goes into even getting permission to do that. You got to think about the environment. You got to think about the people next door. Are you blocking someone's view? I had no idea it was that complex, and I found it fascinating.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, it is complex. It takes an incredible skill set. I mean, people underestimate developers, and there's a lot of different kinds of developers. And that book is focused on, relatively sophisticated urban people that do big, complicated projects in urban places. I mean, This is not the book. The book is not about like production housing at the urban fringe,
Right.
like townhomes and apartments. So these are the folks that understand better than, they're good at they understand the urban politics and they understand costs and they understand, but it's a many splendid thing. There's a lot of different things you have to take into account. And then it takes a long time to get a project done. So things change, economic things in the world change and politicians get elected or not elected. And so it's the dynamic, the complexity of it is really, really interesting. And it makes you have a lot more respect for some of these folks if you see it through their glasses.
Yeah, even if you're trying to do the right thing and please everybody doesn't mean it's always going to work right away.
Yeah, and some people, you can't do the right thing. I mean, there's a lot of that.
Sounds like you have to have a very thick skin and be flexible.
You do. You have to have a thick skin and you have to be cool-headed and you got to be willing to make people unhappy every now and then and be okay with that. Those people are really creative and interesting. I remember talking to a colleague and friend of mine who we'd been working on condo, at the same time back then. And she said, I'll never forget, we'd walk into some building and it would be just a wreck, and a ruin. And we would say, it could be this, we could do that. And then like 3 years later, it looked like that, like the way he described it. And it's like, you couldn't see it yourself. So those people, some of them are really able to see things like
potential.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
One of my favorite parts of the book, you're talking about retail stores and showrooms. This is what's really cool about the book. If I go into the Apple store all the time, I don't really think about why I like it and why it works. But you right here, one example is the Apple Store, which provides a complete experience from the ability to easily play with the products and buy them by letting the salesperson just swipe your credit card on a handled device, to the non-threatening Genius Bar service and free herbal tea or hot cocoa, all wrapped up in a sophisticated and sleek architectural package. That also makes me think of the Nespresso retail store.
Yes.
But you take these things for granted, but somebody's really thought about it. And I'm sure with the Apple Store that originally comes from Steve Jobs and the importance of aesthetics.
Yep. He was about design of everything, and it comes through in all their products still. Yeah.
Let's take a second and go way back in time. What is your first creative memory?
I built a lot of models back when we bought plastic models of airplanes and tanks and ships and cars. And
I remember my brother doing those with the glue.
The glue and the paint and everything. I did a lot of those and I was good at it. And you get to the point where you built most of them. There's a big hobby shop not far from here. Once in a while I walk them down the aisles and I can see all the kits. They're the same ones. They're using the same molds. And I built that fighter jet, and and I reached the point where I did a lot of dioramas, and I started doing these things called military miniatures. They're little soldiers that you paint them in incredible detail with their eyeballs and stuff. And then I started making spaceships, and I was buying sheet stock of styrene and wood and brass tubing.
Where were you putting all these things?
I had this my parents' house. I lived on the third floor, and I had this unusual great bedroom that was about 15 feet wide and 28 feet long, and half of it was my bedroom, and the other half was like a big studio, and I had 2 Luan doors on sawhorses, and I had cutting boards and razor blades and all kinds of stuff, and I built these 3-foot-long spaceship with little lights inside of it and stuff like that.
Wow.
My own design, not from any TV show or movie, and in fact, you're going to like this because I bet you don't know this at all. Your father hired me not once, twice, and I built models for him of automobile accident sites.
Wow, now that I didn't know. That is really cool.
This is true. In both cases, your dad was defending, in one case, a city, a township, and in another case, a utility company. And there had been some kind of car accident, and people sue the deep pocket. So I think in the city, they were suing the city because they thought the stop sign was in the wrong place. I mean, the guy was going 100 miles an hour, it wouldn't have mattered. And the other one, there was utility work going on this road, and somebody had rear-ended somebody because they weren't looking where they were going, but they tried to go after the utility company for money because people were hurt and sad stuff. But anyhow, I built these models. One of them, it was a big, long stretch of road, and everybody was going 60 miles an hour. So it was on a door. I mean, I bought a Luan door, and I made this model that was the length of a door, and had little tiny cars and poles and stuff and everything. And in both cases, your father said to me, "Yeah, good news. We settled." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sad. I thought it's too bad you didn't get to bring it in and use it in a trial in a courtroom." He's like, "Oh, oh no, this is perfect. I mean, they come in, they see the model, and they're like, whoa, this guy's serious. We're gonna have to, get out of. So, so it worked as a prop basically, and convinced the other people that they weren't going to roll over and just give them a ton of money. So
Wow.
yeah, isn't that a funny story? So
That
yeah,
sounds exactly like something my dad would do. Thanks for sharing that, though.
yeah,
That's one little piece I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, you're welcome. I've got a weird box of photos someplace at home, and I've got a couple pictures. I think I have pictures of these things. If I can find them, I'll send you a
All
picture.
right.
I mean, I'm not kidding.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of parents, were your parents creative? And as you get older, do you find yourself going, wow, I'm good at this. I get that from my mom or I get that from my dad. What were they like and were they creative?
You know, it's interesting that you ask and to think about it. They were not creative in an artistic way or productive. My dad was an insurance broker, and my mom, after she raised us, she went back to grad school and became a guidance counselor in a school.
Wow.
But what I would say is that my mother's side of the family, they come from a long line of people who are good at telling stories and fabricate, enhancing stories and even making up stories if it
Yeah.
comes to it. And our family motto ought to be the Mark Twain thing about, if you're trying to tell a good story, why constrain yourself with the facts? And on top of that, my mom has always had like a great way with language and vocabulary, and she says all kinds of things that are. I've been hearing this. You hear these things from your parents your whole life long, the kinds of things they say, but she just had this clever way. She enjoyed using language, and somehow I think that's made its way into my writing.
Yes.
And my daughter, I'm your brother's age, and I'm an older father of younger kids. But my 14-year-old daughter, I swear to God, she channels my mother. She says things that are funny for a kid that age in terms of
Yeah.
the kind of words she uses, and maybe you know what I'm talking about. But so yeah, my answer is yeah, and this is no slight to my parents. At one point, I said to them, back when I was making all this stuff, and by the way. I should say that both my kids have been diagnosed ADHD, and they probably did that. They didn't get it from their mother, and I didn't find out. The first diagnosis, I was 57 years old, and I was
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, this might explain everything since third grade, And so I was like a compulsive, productive kid when it came to the stuff I wanted to do, and
Right.
so. I was actually an average student in high school and even in college. And it wasn't until I was in grad school that I was really motivated. But because I was interested in different things, and so but I would make all this stuff, and I'd finish a model, and I'd show it to my parents, and they would just have they'd be looking at me. They didn't know what to say, and I'd do a painting, and I'd show it to them, and I don't know if I was probably looking for approval or something, and they were sort of speechless. And I asked them years later, like, what was up with that? And they were like. Neither one of us had a creative bone in our body, and you were so productive. We didn't know what to say. We didn't know how to. We couldn't relate to it. So
Interesting. Yeah, I think
yeah,
just because of people have no attention span, we've gone from the Andy Warhol
yeah,
15 minutes down to the TikTok 15 seconds. It wouldn't be surprised me if we all end up with ADHD because the world is moving so quickly.
yes.
And
If
that's
you didn't
interesting
get
that
it, you're gonna. If you didn't have it, you're gonna get it. Yeah, right.
it's interesting that you said you were diagnosed at 57 because one of my heroes, David Byrne, the singer from Talking Heads, said in an interview he didn't find out he had Asperger's till he was in his late 40s. So I think a lot of people, like you say, are just driven artistically, and then they get old and they're like, wait a second, I'm not like everybody else.
Well, it's a funny thing. My kid is a smart kid. He's doing really well in school until fifth grade, and all of a sudden he was like, he went from everything's in one classroom to you got to be in different rooms with different folders and stuff, and his life fell apart, and he was a mess. And it's this executive function stuff, and so we took him to see somebody, and we had him tested, and so yeah, he's going to be ADHD. So I went out and I standing by my car, and I called a friend of mine who's got three ADHD kids, and he's ADHD, and I said. And I said, I just found out my son is ADHD, and I might be looking to you for some advice. And he said, my first piece of advice is you should look in the mirror. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I'm one of these people who, if I want to find out about something, I go buy books. So I went and bought 2 or 3 or 4 books about ADHD, started reading, and I'm like, oh my God, why was I not informed, and then, and it didn't take long for me to get the books from Amazon and start reading them. And so within a few days or a week, I was saying to my son, listen, this is a good thing. This is a superpower.
Yeah.
And the only problem is controlling it. And there is a guy who writes, he's a doctor, he's an ADHD guy. Two ADHD guys who are docs wrote a really good book about ADHD. And the guy says he describes it as having a Ferrari with bicycle brakes. So, which is pretty good, so.
That one is going to stay with me.
Yeah. So, what it means is like, you're good at the stuff you want to do, and you are not able to do the stuff you don't want to do. You're just not built to do it. And so, for me, my life, I've come to, you look back at 57 when you find out, you're like, I have dodged and weaved and gone from one thing to the next thing, looking to not be bored and to be interested in what I'm doing and to be doing something I care about. And I ride a horse till it drops, and then I start the next one. I have a friend here I was talking to recently. He says, I burn my boats every 7 years, So this is the kind of like, going from one thing to the next, because repetition doesn't work for me after a while, and it's interesting. So you think about a career, professions, like I'm an architect, and architects practice. Your dad was a lawyer, lawyers practice,
Right.
The idea is that you can spend your whole life getting better at it. You're never done practicing. There's some things I don't need to do more than 3 or 4 times, and
Right.
So I'm going to go try something else. And I find that I'm better at what I do if I don't quite know what the hell I'm doing, because then I'm motivated by fear to figure it out.
I can relate to that. Yeah. And I think
Right?
at the end of the day, we're all different learners. And most of the stuff I do, there's no wrong way to do it. You just need to get to the destination somehow. Do you think that creativity or that improvisational part of our brain can help people suffering with depression or things like anxiety?
Well, funny you should ask. I'm happy to say that I personally haven't had issues with either of those things, but a lot of people in my family have. So I've seen a lot of depression and anxiety up close. And I think my answer is, I think absolutely. There's nothing better than having something to do. In some ways, that's first thing is like do something. Focus.
Right.
Tangent for a sec. Arnold Schwarzenegger wrote a book about a year ago, like a self-help book. It's pretty good, actually. And at one point he talks about, like, when you get up in the morning, move your body, like sometimes you just got to do something. And I don't want to oversimplify it, because it's not fair to do that. And I mean it, I'm sympathetic, but I think that, being creative is a great way to work through things, keep yourself busy, keep yourself occupied, be optimistic, enjoy doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Making something, not doing anything is a great way, an idle mind is the devil's workshop, right? And
Right.
So I think that, when you're having something to do, and I've had, everybody has their ups and downs in their life, and I've had mine, and what's kept me going is having things to do. I think that in life, you need to have, you're going to have a few things. You're going to have a career, you're going to have a family, you might have a hobby, you might have something else. And you have a special relationship with somebody. And if you only have one thing, and if you only have a job, if you only have a good
Right.
relationship, if that thing goes wrong, you're dead, But if you've got 3 or 4 things going,
Yeah.
one of them's working, you might make it, like, so if, your world's going to hell, but you're sitting up in the middle of the night doing watercolors, that's good, right? It's, you have some control. So
Yeah. Many
my
irons in
answer
the
is
fire.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That way you can, you have a little redundancy in case something isn't, in case not everything's going perfectly. But I think it sure can't hurt.
I agree. I have been obsessed with vertical garden architecture for the last several years. What are your thoughts on that? And for people that don't know, vertical gardens are architectural features that incorporate living plants into the design. Do you have any experience or any thoughts on those type of things?
I'm not an expert. I know enough to be dangerous about this, but I think there's several kinds. You can have it be like, there's a technical term, a green wall. That's one of the things
Yes.
you can have. And so I think you can, sometimes you see these like inside, there's a coffee shop near here that's got a, really high ceiling, 60 feet or something, with a big green wall on one side. And I haven't gone up yet and like pinched one of the leaves. I think it's a real green wall, but the challenge is you got to keep all these things alive, and they've got to be watered appropriately, and they've got to get, the species have to be the right thing, so that the lack of sunlight if it's on the inside, and the outside things can get scorched. So there's kind of an interesting challenge to how well do they work, and do they, they look beautiful in a photograph when they're completed,
Right.
or are they plastic, or,
I never thought of that.
because there's also, well, right. I mean, like, just that's why I say next time go pinch a leaf, so see if it's made out of plastic, because they make plastic plants like super realistic these days. Like it's
Yeah,
not your grandmother's
now
plastic
that
plant.
we're talking
Yeah.
about it, I'm thinking about what would the effect be on the ecosystem too, because who knows what would be living in there. It looks beautiful, but you're right. Let's find out if it's real, and let's find out if it's affecting the environment.
And if it's working, I mean, what does it work? I mean, does it sustain itself? Can it be,
Yes.
I think it's a great thing because it's good for heat island effects in cities, and lowering temperatures and adding humidity because the plants are kind of off-gassing moisture. And
Right.
so it's a good idea. But it depends on where you are and if you're south-facing or north-facing. So I think it's technically complicated to make it work perfectly. But I love the idea. And I also like, there's this thing about urban, kind of vertical farming where people are doing these vertical hydroponic things. It's a similar kind of thing. You have a warehouse with some daylight or some grow lights or whatever, and racks, that have spinach or whatever growing on them vertically. It takes up less horizontal square footage, right? So that stuff is starting to become a little more common. I think people are still working out the bugs.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, exactly.
How is what you do being affected by the current administration? Any new challenges? And I also did a little digging. It looks like in 2018, part of an article that I think was called Trump in the Media, Urban Development. What is it like going between administrations? Do those things affect what you do because you're helping plan cities and neighborhoods?
Yes. And so it's interesting. I have a couple different answers. I mean, I live in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
We're a blue state, and Minneapolis has declared itself a sanctuary city, and the current president doesn't like that. The bigger thing is I teach in a public affairs school, and the administration's going after universities, which is, I don't understand the thinking,
Right.
but specifically the students in our school, they're all people who are planning on going into public service. Most of them, or they're going to be in the nonprofit sector, which is affected by federal and state local grants. So they're going to be in consulting, which is going to get paid for by governments or nonprofits. So in some way or another, most of them are going to end up touching the public sector. And there's so much uncertainty right now. Grants have been canceled that have affected people I know in the school I'm in. And students have been affected. I follow people on LinkedIn. I follow LinkedIn, and there was a student recently who posted said that her job with the Federal Highway Administration, she got her dream job when she graduated a year ago, and then it got cut because she was probationary, and then they offered the job back to her, and she wrote a post a couple of days back saying, I decided not to go back because I can't, this uncertainty isn't something I want in my life.
Right.
So you see the chilling effect is, you see the current students are asking like, oh man, should I be worried about this? Yes. And then folks that just graduated in the last couple of years are just trying to get going in their careers. And some of them are, if you're probationary, that's not a good thing. So yeah, I'm seeing it affect a lot of the people that I've, met and known through my teaching. And then, our governor was vice presidential candidate in this last election, and our state's a blue state. So, I think we're seeing the beginning of it. I don't know how this is all going to play out over the next 3.5 years, but there's a disconnect when you think about, I'm writing a piece right now for my blog that's about freedom in public places. And, what do you do when you've got a president who says, when people are having a peaceful protest, can't you just shoot them in the legs? I mean,
yeah.
Oh my God. Is that where we are?
Yeah, it's like common sense has gone out the window, or empathy or anything like that.
Or democracy. Yeah, I mean, it's really been weird seeing like the LinkedIn messages about, folks losing their jobs and then being offered their jobs back. But people just resigning because they don't like after 20 years in public service, saying, I'm quitting because I can't deal with this anymore. And I should say, I spent 4 years in Philadelphia working in government. So I get civil service and civil servants, and I feel like I've been one. I've spent a lot of my time in the last 15 years consulting to local government in Minneapolis and just some other organizations. And so I feel like it feels very close to me. And I think a lot of people don't understand that we need our civil servants. They do a great job. They keep all the things running. They've got all the institutional memory.
Absolutely.
And they're dedicated to our democracy. And, the idea that you can just, lop off an arm and a leg, it's really...
Get rid of 10,000 jobs in one day, yeah. Let's talk about something on the flip side, something really positive. Do you still teach at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, University of Minnesota?
I do.
I love that quote on your website. You said the greatest reward I get from teaching the course is that every year 20 to 30 more students are out there in the world succeeding, and I get to see them out there. What is that like?
So this is a funny thing. Now that I've talked about being a short attention span kid, my career has gone from architecture to city government to grad school to real estate to self-employed consultant. And weirdly, I started teaching as an adjunct at Drexel University in about 1990. A friend called me up and said, "Hey, can you teach a drawing course for some architecture students starting in 3 weeks?" And I didn't know enough to think that's not enough time to prepare anything. But I did it, and I did it for a while, and one thing led to another. And then, and now, that was 1990, 35 years later, with the exception of about 5 or 6 years, I've taught continuously somewhere. I taught in Philadelphia. I taught a little bit at Penn when I was there. I taught in the architecture school here at the University of Minnesota and in the public policy school. And since I moved here 21 or 22 years ago, and I taught for a couple of years, and then I got another job teaching, and I've stayed at the Humphrey School for, like 17 years. And when I moved here, I didn't know a soul. My wife got a job here, and neither of us knew anybody. And we came here for her job, and you get to know a few folks in your work. And interestingly, a big part of my sort of friends network and colleagues network is former students. So you know somebody for 3 or 4 months in a classroom, and then they go out, and a few years later they're running everything. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I was with my daughter today, and we went and had lunch at a place, and ran into 2 of them having lunch together. And one of them, she was in my class like the first time I taught it 18 years ago, or 17 in 2008, whatever that was. And he took it a couple of years later, and he works for her. And it's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I get him to, and I run a speaker series for the school for the planning students, and I get all these alumni to come back because I know all of them, and I can call them up and ask for a favor, and they come, and they're happy to talk to the students. And so there's been this interesting, fabulously rewarding experience. And it's an ego hit. I'd be lying if I told you otherwise, but it's like super fun to see all these people out there and run into them and get to talk to them and have lunch with them or coffee. And some of them stay in touch. They want to, every now and then somebody wants a piece of advice or an introduction to somebody. And I always say, yes, how can I help? And so that's been a really interesting, rewarding. In fact, a few years back, I went to the school and I said, "Look, I would love to do more of this. If there could be a way for that to happen, I would like to start to do a little less consulting." I was coming up on 60, and so that I have a different contract. I teach more. I teach 2 classes now, and I run the speaker thing, and I'm there a lot, and I feel like I'm a part of it, kind of more than ever before. And I plan on doing it for as long as they'll have me. I really enjoy it. And so that's that's the one thing that I keep, I've been doing for a long time, and I keep enjoying it. I haven't felt the need to go, "Okay, I'm done with this. It's been 7 years, time to burn the boats." So, yeah.
Well, like you say, it does sound like a continually rewarding type of thing to spend your time on.
Yep.
Socrates once said this: "By far the greatest and most admirable form of wisdom is that needed to plan and beautify cities and human communities." What are your thoughts on that?
I like that. I'm writing this post about freedom in public space. I talk about the Athenian Agora, Golden Age Greece, like 4,000 or 400 BC, in the time of Socrates and
right.
Aristophanes and Aristotle and all those people, and what a great public experience the Athenian Agora was, because everyone could be there. Everyone was allowed to be there. Slaves, women, men, everybody, people, foreigners, and public places like that in other cities in the world until that time had only been like places where you marshal your army, or where
Right.
the generals give orders. So they were they were like Tiananmen Square kind of thing, as opposed to a big giant outdoor food market and
Right.
people arguing philosophy and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think Socrates is right. I think it's hard to do. I think the modern era of architecture and planning, people made big, did big things that didn't necessarily include, all the ingredients that you need to do to have a place actually be human. So I think it's a fine art to, figure out how to make a place that's really good for people, and people will go there. People will feel welcome there. And right now, one of my concerns is, people being policed and surveillance. Yeah. And I had a student who kind of turned, through something that happened to her, forced me to have to look into, the immigrant experience in public space, which isn't the experience a 62-year-old white man has in a public space.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's a long answer, but yeah, I think Socrates is right, and that's my favorite. I've lived in cities all my life. I live downtown. I've always lived in, downtowns, and I just, walking down the street, sitting in parks. I just love, we got to be able to talk to each other, and you need public space to do that.
It would certainly help if people could, at least for a little time, get off their phone and talk face to face. And I think when I go into stores or any place in public, I find whatever people's beliefs are, it goes a lot better when you talk in person and you find out you have a lot more in common than you have different.
Yeah. You have kids, you've got a life, you've got, challenges and stressors and things that make you happy, and you like fishing or whatever. Yeah, we have a lot more in common, but you wouldn't know it. And you're right. I mean, these devices, we've all got the problem. I'm no better than anybody else. You stand in line and everybody's looking at their phone. It's like you used to stand in line and talk to the person next to you.
And know your neighbors. That's pretty rare now,
right.
too.
Right. And now people don't know how to talk to each other,
Yeah. As I told you before, one of my favorite architects is Antoni Gaudí, and top of my bucket list someday is go to Barcelona and see Sagrada Familia. And
I'd like to see it too. I'm with you on that, Malcolm. Yeah.
Oh, everybody keeps showing me photos. I'm just like, anyway.
I think it's complete. He's completed it, right? I think they've just recently, or they're very close to completing it. I mean,
that is true.
Yeah, I mean,
more than 100 years, right?
Yeah, incredible.
I love how he was inspired by nature. And at one point he said, those who look for the laws of nature as a support for their new works collaborate with the creator.
I like that. I'm not particularly religious, but the laws of nature, I think we can all agree on. And I will tell you that as an architecture student, I wrote a paper about a Gaudí building, and I remember really enjoying figuring out what he was about when I was writing this paper, because he was doing really a different kind of thing. And it's not an easy thing to do. Everything's custom and nothing's straight and flat. But yeah. But the balconies on this apartment building look like seaweed had splashed up against the building. Yeah. And in an artful way. I mean, not a messy way, but
well, I think all his buildings look organic, and you're just in awe of, how does it even stand up compared to a regular building? And I think I read that when he was younger, he was sick, and they had put him in some type of a nursery where he could see plants, and that inspired him to make these unorthodox type of structures.
The laws of nature and gravity and physics are pretty straightforward. Why monkey with them? And I do find myself like questioning, and then I see some big, star architect project where, just because you could do it doesn't mean you should have done it. I mean, that kind of overhang is really expensive to build and stupid, so I have my limits. I'm, cranky old man architect, but I do see things sometimes and think like, I don't know. Did you have to do that?
What's a good example, though, is when I'm driving around Hollywood, I often pass the Petersen Museum, which is like a automobile exhibit type of thing where you can go see famous cars. And when you see this building, it looks like it's melting. There's no straight edges. There's no corners or anything. But the more that I passed it, I go, oh, it's just like a rectangle, like a box, and they just put this weird outside type of texture around it. So maybe that's a good combination of aesthetics and practicality. I don't know. But I just remember the day that I realized, oh, it's just a box with a fancy outside.
Well, I'll just tell you, when you look at the cover of my book about real estate developers, you'll see this high-rise condominium building that's got these wavy floors. And that's exactly what that is. It's a building in Chicago. It's a 98-story condo, apartment, hotel building. And I met with that developer and talked to him about it. And he said, yeah, it was the simplest box we've ever built. All we had to do was articulate the slab edge, and he had a big, long, interesting story about how they did that and how little it cost to make it look that cool.
Yeah.
And in the end, it was a box, and that made it easier to design on the inside and less cost, more cost effective and everything. And so, yeah, there's something to be said for, it doesn't have to be that complicated all the time.
Right.
Yeah. There's another famous architect named Robert Venturi used to say that you're either a duck or a decorated shed. He studied Las Vegas, and a decorated shed is what it sounds like, a box that's been articulated a little bit like the museum you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the duck was a reference to there's a duck that's it's a weird little thing near the Jersey Shore that's like a hot dog stand. I can't remember exactly what it is right now, but it's built, and it's like a big 3-dimensional duck, and there's buildings like that, fancy museums and things that are really formally, have really unique shapes to them. So that's a duck. But most buildings are probably decorated sheds because that's cost effective and money matters. So, yeah.
All right. Last quote is by Voltaire, the French Enlightenment writer, philosopher, satirist.
Love Voltaire.
He once said,
Voltaire, yeah.
This is a really funny one. The ancient Romans built their greatest masterpieces of architecture, their amphitheaters for wild beasts to fight in.
Voltaire.
Short and sweet.
It's so funny. Yeah, you do this grand, high-style stuff, and then you slaughter people in it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my. Like bread and circuses or Gladiator or whatever. Yeah, no, well, he was incisive. He was really good at satirizing and making fun of people, and I think that's isn't it funny? I mean, the Romans kind of stole a lot of style, borrowed. I mean, they were shameless. They didn't they didn't feel bad about it. They took the same Greek gods and changed their names, and
right.
They did invent concrete. They were really smart. They were good with water and aqueducts and sewers, and they invented concrete but they did make this beautiful classical architecture, and then they used to flood the Colosseum in Rome was designed so they could flood it in 6 feet of water.
I had heard that, and my students say they see it on TikTok, but I don't know if that was true.
My understanding is, they would flood it and have little military naval battles going on. I mean, that's kind of what Voltaire's talking about, isn't it?
That is innovative, but a little disturbing as well. Wow.
It's like, how bored were they? Right?
All right, listen, before we go, I want to help you promote everything. So first of all, your website is peterhendeebrown.com, correct? That would be a good place to start.
Yep.
A little bit of everything. We've got your 2 books, your podcast, The Reflective Urbanist. Are you on any social media if people want to see the latest thing? Are you on Instagram or Facebook?
I'm kind of a Luddite about that stuff. I should be. I know I'm on LinkedIn, and that's it. And so
you have a lot more time to yourself.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying not to be distracted by this stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for talking to me today. And I have a lot more questions. So would you be willing to get together on the phone in a couple months?
I'll be happy to do that. Thanks for having me, Malcolm. It was really nice to talk to you for the first time in a long time. And yes, I'd be happy to talk again.
I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Yeah, you have a good night too. I have I'll tease you with a topic for the next time we talk, no pressure.
Okay.
But one of the things that you think about, hopefully you're not so self-involved it's weird, but you think about yourself like, how did I get to be like this? And one of the things that I come to see is that, architecture school, you're kind of taught sort of a solitary genius model of creativity. Like, you're going to have this vision and you're going to have this patron who's going to shower you with money and not tell you that, you're not going to have to do anything. They just keep their mouth shut. You design something for them. And it's
claps.
like not like that. Yeah. I mean, it's just so not like that. And it's just, it's a disservice to the students, but all the things I've worked on the last 20 years that have been really rewarding have been on huge teams with lots of people, and everybody plays a part, and like your ego's you got to have a different way of thinking about your ego, right? But if you want to work on a big project that's like a part of a city, a big, like a mile long street or a plaza, or
right.
I worked on a Viking stadium. I mean, like, if you want to work on something like that, you're not going to do that by yourself, right? But you can play an important role, and it's super rewarding. And then on the other hand, things like writing a book or doing a podcast, that's like, there's a psychologist who talks about, I think it even goes back to like Montaigne, it's like, you have to have a little back shop of your own where you make your own thing by yourself. And I'm a huge, so that's what a book is. So, I can work on a big project with a lot of people. That's one thing, but I like to have one thing that's mine that, it's either I get credit for it or blame, but, I use collaborators, and I ask friends for help, and I ask people to read things for me. But at the end of the day, it's my product, and
yes,
of a different scale, of a different nature. But I like to have both, and it's it satisfies two different itches.
Yeah, that's a good thing to contrast. I never planned on being a teacher, let alone a music teacher, but that's what I've done for the last 12 years. I'm going to be kind of like you said, working for myself and going from being an extrovert to more one-on-one with people. It's pretty interesting because I've never really done this. On one hand, I'm a little terrified to jump into something different, but on the other hand, I'm pretty excited.
Well, fear's good. It's a motivator. You can do it. I mean, I've been working for myself for a long time, creating my own problems and then solving them. So
yeah,
go for it.
Awesome. All right. Well, I love the idea for our next talk. So thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks, Peter.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Take care.